Today, on Master the Game, we are going to be reviewing the Dungeons & Dragons Dungeon Master's Guides. Should you buy this book? Let's find out. A couple months back, we were given the Growing Magic Items collection by JonnyDM. You can see here that the Growing Magic Items collection has a wide variety of magic items that you can use in your Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition games. This is a collection of over 4 Electrum best-selling PDFs over on the DM's Guild, and you can, like I said, go pick this up for yourself to see what this is all about. The idea is these magic items in here will grow as your players level up, so you can give these to them at low levels where they can then unlock new abilities as you play through your campaign. I definitely recommend checking this out, as well as one of the many other items that JonnyDM has put up over on the DM's Guild. If you want to support the channel, you can head on over to our affiliate link in the description below, where you can pick up this item or one of the many others by JonnyDM over there at no additional charge to you. So as you can see, I picked up both the alternate art cover and the standard art cover of the DMG. Now, when it comes to these covers, the art, I think, is actually really well done. This one is kind of a throwback to D&D of old, and you'll see that also with a lot of the art that's been in these books. The nod to the D&D cartoon and all of that. So this one has Warduke on the cover, which he is awesome. It also has Venger on it. So if you're into like that nostalgic feel, then you'll probably really like this one. I do have to say the art style on this isn't gonna be for everybody. It does have a very unique style. Venger on here doesn't look quite like you remember from the cartoons, for example. He looks a little more sinister, but it is still a very cool piece of art for this cover. As for the alternate cover, this is kind of a shout out to the Drow. It's a very nice piece here. You can see someone being wrapped in a web. Again, a very beautiful book. The new alternate covers are very different from the older alternate covers from the 2014 D&D by Hydro. But again, it's got a nice look, a little bit more, I don't know if whimsical is the way to say it, but definitely a different style that I think is pretty nice. These pieces were done by 2 different artists. The standard cover was done by Tyler Jacobson, and the special edition cover was done by Alana Richards. Go find them on their social media, check them out. You can see some really cool art on their pages. But they did a great job with these, and I think it fits the book very well, actually. The Drow, the nod to the Drow might not necessarily fit this book per se, but it is still a very nice piece, and I actually like it for this book. The art within this book is also, I would say, pretty good. It's sort of what you would expect out of the modern Dungeons & Dragons books today. For some people, it might not be as impactful, if you really liked the old black and white art or whatever, but definitely fits the modern D&D books. And so, if you're looking through one book to the next, you're not going to have this jarring, like, oh, the style's different or anything like that, which is quite an accomplishment considering they use a variety of artists for these books and from one book to the other. So, again, the art's pretty good, and I've got no complaints about it whatsoever. In fact, there are some pieces that definitely stand out as pretty dang amazing. But within this book itself, you're going to see a little bit more generalized art. There's a couple pieces that really give off the adventuring vibe, but, there's a lot of, landscapes and things like that, especially when you're going through the plains. So again, some pretty good art in here that, I personally really like. When it comes to the organization of this book, there are a couple things that stand out to me. First of all, it is a well-organized book from cover to cover, but there are a couple small complaints that I have. When you get into the chapter, the DM's Toolbox, there are things that when I was reading it, threw me off a little bit. I felt like I was reading about one thing, then another thing, but then back to something similar to the previous thing, and that was kind of bothering me. The reason is because in that chapter, they decided to do it in alphabetical order rather than grouping similar things together. And what I mean by that is you will have, hazards talked about, and weather effects, and you'll have traps. And those three things have some similarities, but they're broken up by things like renown, and they're just broken up by various things that I don't think necessarily fit that tone. So I have some notes here. This section, if they decided to kind of group it by common sections, you would have seen things like environmental effects maybe, and hazards and traps all together. You might have seen gods and other power grouped with supernatural gifts. You might have seen marks of prestige mixed with renown, or at least, back to back. And you might have seen like firearms and explosive mixed with siege weapons. Unfortunately, as I was reading through it, these things were just, dispersed throughout that by alphabetical order. And so you'd read about one thing, and then it would go into something completely unrelated and different for a little bit, then something else completely unrelated, but then back to something that's kind of similar to the other thing. It really threw me off when reading the book, and because I was reading it straight through, I think it just left a bad taste in my mouth. I understand why they did it. This is a reference guide, and so therefore the value is in that you're going to easily find the thing you need for what you're prepping or for what you want to have happen, and you're not going to just read it cover to cover or straight through on the chapter. So I understand why they did it, and so that's probably for the better, the way they did it. It's just as I was reading it really bothered me and sat with me, so I had to say that. The other thing is, Bastions, after the magic items and before the index, probably the best spot for this in this book. However, in my opinion, Bastions should have just been in the player's handbook. Probably should have just been completely left out of this altogether. Having Bastions, which are so player-facing in this book, really just felt unnecessary. And, so I'll give you more of my opinions on Bastions in a little bit. But for now, just know that I think it should have been left out of this book. Maybe in the player's handbook. Maybe it should have been put in something different. Just not this book. The content of this book is, in my opinion, exceptional for new dungeon masters. For a lot of us who've been creating YouTube content for years, we have been saying a lot of things that are in this book. How to handle character death, for example, is exactly what I've been saying for years. People have disagreed with me. And it's funny because it even talks about how to handle character death when you have a group that doesn't want character death. So there's some little tips in there that I also really enjoyed. And it's, again, things I've been saying. I've been talking about alternatives to death, like having to explore and get your way out of the afterlife or limbo, having to rescue the party, being taken to prison, having a whole different adventuring party resurrect you, and all of those things. So those things are kind of touched on in here, and I thought that was really good, among a litany of other things. The examples of play in this book were very good. It's definitely how I've seen a lot of groups play. So again, I think if you are just starting out with Dungeons & Dragons and you've never ran it and you've maybe never played it, this book and the Player's Handbook for 2024 are amazing resources for you. It's going to teach you how to play. It's going to have examples. If you read that and then also just try to watch a live play for a little bit, maybe an episode of Critical Role, or whatever you want, whatever you find that comes up first, see how different people play the game. I think you're going to pick up on it a lot quicker than most of us who had to do it by trial and error. So definitely say, if you're a new DM, pick this up for sure, because it has amazing content for you in this book. With that said, there are a few things in this book that I might not have completely agreed on, things that it suggests or potential things you could try. There were a couple things that I just didn't like, either that they put them in here or that they didn't elaborate enough to prevent problems. So I'm going to give you guys some of the examples of the good things that I saw in this book that I really liked, especially in those early chapters. And I'm going to give you a couple examples of the things that didn't really sit well with me. And so I did take some notes because I want to make sure that I hit them. Number one, some really good advice on page 5, the very first page. In fact, the whole first page is really great. In fact, some of the things it talks about was embracing the shared story. And that's exactly what Dungeons and Dragons is. It is a group of people deciding to collaborate on a story. This is not, and it says it's not a competition. It is a game, but it's not a game you win necessarily. Sure, you can overcome obstacles and stuff like that, but really what it is about, and in my experience in over 25 years of playing tabletop RPGs, the best games I've ever played were when it felt more collaborative. When it wasn't adversarial. It wasn't, well, you're not good enough to beat this thing, and you better go level up so you can fight this thing or whatever. It was way more fun when it was going with your failures and making that fun. I can think of a million examples of games where the failures were so much more fun, like especially if you rolled a nat 1, over critical successes. And that is because of the story element, the memories, just the role play around those when you have a group that is willing to fail fantastically. So definitely like that. Talks about not being a competition. Absolutely love that it talks about not being a competition, because I've played with people who view it that way, and honestly, I think they could enjoy the game so much more if they could figure out how to change their mindset around Dungeons and Dragons and tabletop RPGs in general. Page 8 goes into how much time you have to prep for a session, and it breaks it down by 1 hour, and here's the few things you should really focus on prepping, and if you've got 2 hours, here's what you should focus on prepping, and if you've got 3 hours, here's some more things you should focus on prepping. So I thought that was really good, because it's telling you here's the most important stuff, compared to some of this stuff. While it can be important, it's not as important. And I think it hit the nail on the head. This section for me probably took 10 years of running games periodically before I really started to figure out what I should be prepping for my games. Now, that's not to say this is going to be exactly what you need. You might find out that you struggle in some areas and you need to focus over here more. You might find out that maybe you're not the best at improv, so you need to know these couple things to help you with that. You might decide your play style dictates that you need a couple things that are different. However, if you start with these, you can then slowly figure out what you need more of and what you need to maybe focus on less. Maybe certain things just come natural. So again, great section here. I really like how it broke down the time of how long an encounter might take at your table, how long social interactions and exploration and all these things would also take at your table. These were also things that I haven't really thought about. I think I just instinctively had a rough estimate in my head, but I've never really thought about it in the sense of, I know this is going to be 30 minutes and this is going to be this. I've sort of had formulas, like where I go, okay, I know I'm running a couple hour session. I'm going to need one combat encounter, a social encounter, and maybe a puzzle, and then a little bit of exploration in there. And that would usually fit a 2-hour session really well for an online game. Whereas an in-person game, I'd probably go, okay, let's have a little bit more social here. Maybe I'll do 2 combat encounters, and based on the amount of time we were going to play, for sure. And so some of that comes natural with time, but I never really quantified how long each thing takes. I just naturally kind of knew how to fill my game sessions, if that makes sense. So either way, I really like this section. I thought that was a very helpful thing on page 8. And, so I definitely think new DMs are going to do great with that. Page 10 talks about passing time, learning what and when to skip mundane things is a skill. So, skipping your long exploration that takes you 2 weeks to get from one place to another place. Leave out the stuff that just doesn't matter. You can tell them it takes 2 weeks, and on your journey you may have encountered some goblins, and you need to when you went to draw your weapons, they had already fled because they were so scared into the hills. And you might do this just to tell your party that, these types of monsters are in this area. And so later on, you can have them go back there if they need to or whatever. But it can really add flavor to your setting without you having to get bogged down with meaningless combat and, who's doing what watch and, all this stuff. What are you doing while you sleep at night? That doesn't mean always skip it. You might occasionally want to encourage your players to role play more. There's items out there, that talk about, hey, it's campfire, and what does your party role play or talk about around the campfire? You might want to pull something like that out again just to break up your campaign a little bit or your sessions, because that will add some role play. I know that's not in the book, but it kind of goes along with skipping certain things. There might be times you don't want to either. But understanding when to skip stuff is, again, it's a very useful skill, and I like that it basically tells you here to start thinking about things to skip or leave out. Okay, so I thought that was a great section that I think all new DMs need to pay attention to. Page 13 talked about play styles. I love the breakdown of the play styles. I thought it was very helpful for me to really self-analyze a little bit, and I did. I took a minute to think about, am I hack and slash, and or am I immersive, and maybe you're a little bit of both, and maybe you want a lot of one thing or a lot of another thing, but you don't want another thing. Do you like gritty, darker themes? Do you like more adult rated themes? Do you like things that are more PG? So actually figuring that out about yourself, figuring that out about your players in your group can go a long way. And you might find after you learn these things, maybe there's certain people that aren't compatible for you or your group, or maybe you are not compatible for your group. So you might have to come to a compromise, or you might have to decide, hey, maybe we need to find somebody else or whatever. Again, it's going to come down to a conversation there. It doesn't tell you need to kick someone out or anything like that, but it does talk about play styles. And so I think this is an important time to think about some of the harder conversations you might need to have with players at your table. Page 26 talks about narration, talks about how to deliver information. Try not to give too long a descriptions. You don't want to be reading paragraphs to your players. You want to keep it kind of short, but evocative and interesting. Use words like evocative, right? Use big, flavorful words that everyone's going to know the definition of, but use these words to kind of draw them in. Lead by example. When you're describing how your monster hits, actually talk about it. The goblin pulls out his jagged, busted up scimitar that's being held together by twine, and he lunges forward, swiping in an awkward way at you, clearly untrained as he misses. Things like that. Rather than just saying, I rolled 11 to hit. Does that hit you the fighter's AC? Rather than talking in numbers, talk in narrative description. Don't describe it like Tolkien. We don't have time for, again, 2 paragraphs just about the inlays in the sword that he just pulled out. That's great. It's cool. But let's simplify it a little bit, okay? It also talks about distinguishing options, making things clear as to what people can do by your descriptions and things like that. Let the players know without really saying what's there. It's more of insinuating what's there, and that can make things more interesting at your table and draw them in and create some engagement there as well. On page 30, there are 2 things that I think are really good as well. One of them is improvising damage, which will come up at times where you're trying to figure out, oh crap, how much damage would this cost if they fell here, or if they got burned, or this thing happened, how much damage might they take? So there's this table that's very helpful, and I like that. The other thing that's on this page is like success at a cost, or kind of like failing forward, things like that. There have been a lot of times where I have played in games where if you didn't roll well enough to succeed, you just failed. And I have played in plenty of games where you rolled to succeed, and no matter what, it was always good. Now, there are game systems out there that do a really good job of succeeding with failure or failing with successes, and things like that add a lot of narrative to these games that I think is fantastic. And I've played a few of them, and I have taken some things from that for my D&D games. So, for example, if you know your group has to get through this locked door, because the big bad guy's over there, and basically the end of the quest is through this locked door, and it's a big iron door, so it's not like a fighter's going to necessarily break it down, or maybe you do have that as an option. So the first option, the thief comes up and he's trying to lock pick it, and he fails. So maybe they're in a time constraint, so you make it take longer because of the failure. Maybe there's degrees of success, so maybe you had a DC of 20 to get through it. If they roll anywhere between a 15 and a 20, it just takes a little bit extra time, so sets them back. If it's between a 10 and a 15, maybe it takes a long time, but he's also a little bit louder as he gets really frustrated, and he breaks his tool just in time as it pops the lock open. So now not only did he take a long time, he was noisy, he also broke the pick. And maybe anything under a 10 is a catastrophic failure. He breaks his tools, the door pops open, and in the process, maybe he stubs his toe and trips, and so he's now prone, and on the other side there's a bad guy waiting, and you just start combat prone. So you can do things to kind of fail, even like you succeeded but failed, right? So you could do things like that. There's other things you can do in this regard. It's not just that. For example, you're walking across a really shoddy rope bridge, and they fail the dex save when it breaks, right? And so, yeah, they could fall, but maybe you let them fall but hang on to the ledge, and now they suffer exhaustion because maybe they strained their shoulder as they were trying to pull themselves up or whatever. So there's a lot of different things you could do that have like some consequences. It doesn't have to be a mechanical consequence, but that's just another idea that I think is cool. It adds to the session. It's memorable. And if you have a group that trusts you as a DM and vice versa, you can have a ton of fun with this failing forward idea. Page 63 is all about death for 2 pages. This section is fantastic. So this section starts off talking about how to kind of handle character death. Don't force it on players. Make it fair, but don't ever just single someone out like they made this super powerful character that you just can't stand, and you're like, man, I can't ever do anything challenging to them, so I'm just going to make sure they fail. I know that they have a low stat in this, so I'm going to attack it for that and drop them, and boom, they have to make a new character. Yes, win for the DM. Don't do that. So it talks about making things fair for everybody at the table. And this is an important tip, right? Because if players feel targeted, it can pull them out of it. It can create a lot of hurt feelings. It talks about providing a fair warning, which I do sometimes. I will say I don't do it all the time. I do let my players know up front at session 0, dice fall where they may. I don't pull my punches. If, I roll a crit, I roll a crit. And there is a chance your character will be dropped to 0 hit points. But if a player decides to fight and you're in a situation where, you've gone a few rounds and the he's looking a little hurt, but maybe not too bad. He's got 300 total hit points and they've withered him down to 100, and the players are starting to run out of resources and surprisingly, they haven't been rolling well, so the monster's doing a little bit better than them, and you can sense that maybe one or two players is about to drop, and they decide, in this round, they're still going to attack. And the book kind of encourages you to say, are you sure you want to continue to attack? Something like that subtle thing, can actually help them change their mind. Maybe they go, yes, that's what my character would do. Great. Maybe, though, they are the type of player who is really worried about losing their character, and so they decide, on second thought, how bad does this monster look? Oh, okay, he's hurt, but he's not that bad. Okay, well, I'm a little rough, so maybe I should hide or run or do something other than just attack. So that is something it suggests. It doesn't hurt your game. It is a good tip to do. So again, it is something to think about. Or maybe that you've prepped a few different encounters. The party wants to go after the dragon. It's an adult dragon. It's, got all sorts of kobold minions. That's how you've prepped the encounter or started to kind of think of it. And maybe you were thinking, maybe in 2 sessions they'll go there. And because they heard there was a dragon, they're like, ooh, let's go fight the dragon and get their horde. You might want to gently encourage them, and you might even do it through roleplay. You might have an NPC that says, wait. Have you been able to, fight such a beast? And do you have the right armor and items? Because your chain shirt doesn't look like it can take fire breath or acid breath. You might want to think about getting better equipment first, or, things like that to kind of encourage the party to, maybe we should think about something different. So there's different ways you can kind of subtly nudge them with that. It does talk about some optional rules here that I think are decent. Some of the optional rules that stood out to me is this comatose and sudden awakening. They call it defeated, not dead. And I like this, but I don't think you should use this all the time. I think if you've got a group of 5 people and one person is really scared of their character dying to the point where they get upset, maybe they cry, maybe it really, really bothers them. Maybe you let them know, hey, if something happens, we might have some options here where death doesn't have to be final, which again, I tell all my groups at session 0 that, but maybe you say, hey, we might try this optional rule for you just once. It's like one get out of jail free card. Maybe you play your character a little more cautious, but you'll get this once, and after that, dice fall where they may, or however you want to handle it. Heck, maybe you have a group that doesn't really want character death, so this is what happens all the time. So that's a pretty cool section there for specific groups and players. It's not for everybody, but I could definitely see that being very helpful to people. Death scenes, again, a very interesting way to at least give a character something to do when they're making their death saves. Encourage them to narrate it. Maybe you help them. You ask them if they pass or fail. They tell you they fail. You help them by saying, yes, you see the bright light getting bigger as you walk up these stairs towards these pearly gates, or you know that their deity is something else, and so you're having them walk up these stairs or walk this path or stand there as this shadowy figure steps towards them, or however you want to describe it. But anyways, the point is you're giving them narration and something to do on their turn other than just roll dice, crap, I pass or fail. So again, the death section I think is really good. It's something I've been talking about for years. It's something that I've dabbled with a few of my groups, especially with trying things other than just straight up dying. And even the death saves thing, we've played one-shots where I've had DMs actually encourage role-playing your death saves out in a narrative way too. So great stuff here that I strongly recommend for all groups. So a couple of the things I don't like. The first one that really stood out to me is something that I strongly discourage groups from doing. On page 23, it was kind of talking about group sizes, I believe. And one of the things that it had recommended was DM-controlled adventurers. Basically a DM PC. Now, I know not everybody agrees with me. A lot of people, especially starting out, think this is a very good thing to do. They think, oh, I can give hooks easier. I can help steer the group to different things that I want them to do. They think they have these good ideas that they're going to be able to help their game with this. The other thing is a lot of times they're playing alongside the other players as a player character with this guy. And that is where things can get really bad. The book does say not to steal spotlight, but that's all it says. It doesn't go into any further tips or advice on how not to overshadow players and how not to steer them or whatever. And I think this is a huge mistake. I would have rather seen this not in the book because I think people are going to try this, and far more times than not, it's going to go poorly. That's been my experience with groups when we've had DMPCs. It's usually gone very poorly. There's been a couple times it's been fine. And I'm not talking about just an NPC that joins you for like 5 minutes, or for a whole session or two. I am talking about a GM's or a DM's player character that is with the group for the whole campaign or multiple adventures or whatever. That's just too much, and it usually leads to problems. Just my opinion. Take that for what it is. But I've just had a lot more bad experience. And it usually revolves around stealing spotlight. Or it usually revolves around the DMPC saying, we should really do this thing. And everyone in the group saying, oh, well, that is the DM telling us we should do that thing. Rather than the thing they wanted to do. So it just becomes an issue all around, in my opinion. The other thing that really stood out to me is on page 47, it talks about not repeating game states. And what it means is when you have a group that decides to run from a monster or NPCs or whatever, mid-combat, they just decide to flee, and as a DM, you chase them to re-engage, even though they just use disengage and they're trying to get away. I don't fully agree with this. If you know your party's trying to flee because it's too dangerous or whatever, find a way to let them. For example, let's use the dragon as an example again. They're in a dragon's lair. They decided to do this even though you said, are you sure? And they said yes, and they get there, and so you kind of role play a little, but then the dragon shows its might by maybe killing an NPC that was with them or something, and then the party goes, ooh, never mind, guys, let's flee. And they start running. Well, the dragon should chase them, but maybe as the party is starting to run out the way they came in, they see a small opening that only they can fit through, and maybe the kobolds, but the dragon is far too big. So you say, yeah, you see, as you're running away, you see this small opening. What do? Give them a chance, right? And then they all flee. That's a great way to do that. But don't necessarily have a creature, monster, or whatever just automatically not chase. That's the part that I don't like, because you don't want the monsters to just feel like, okay, they'll just wait here till you come back, and like in a video game. You do want to do some of that. And there are chase rules in here. So use those chase rules if you want to. Maybe give the party a little bit of an advantage while doing it. Maybe give them inspiration for being smart rather than good role play. It's like, oh yeah, you did the smart thing. Here, have inspiration. Maybe that'll help you flee or whatever. You can do things like that will ultimately help you. So again, it does take a little bit of thinking on the fly to do that, but I didn't agree with just not re-engaging in combat or whatever, because I've had plenty of sessions where this happens and you re-engage, and it hasn't been a huge issue, and it's been fun. And I've even had players who said, yeah, I thought I was going to have to flee, but, luckily we weren't as bad off as I thought. So don't necessarily just automatically do it, but if you know your party's trying to escape, let them escape, but come up with a good way. Don't just say, oh, that's it. The monster decides to stay back. Do it if it makes sense, but if it doesn't make sense, don't necessarily do it either. I think I get what it's saying, but at the same time, I don't fully agree with it. And for example, there are built-in mechanics in the game where it is about disengaging and using your bonus actions to get in more advantageous spaces. Like rogues and monks can use bonus actions to disengage and still attack and do other stuff. So, again, I don't think a blanket rule that, if they've disengaged with you, don't re-engage. I don't necessarily agree with that. So, yeah, that's some of the bad stuff that stood out to me, advice-wise. But it isn't necessarily bad advice. It's just that they should have included more and elaborated with examples and things like that to really get across to a new player in when it might be okay and when it might not be okay. I think that's my problem with it more than anything. It's just too short of a section, and it's making a black and white statement about something that's a little bit more gray than that, a little more nuanced. So I think it's more beneficial if they actually describe that, put some more time into it. And they could have done that if certain things were left out of this book that I think shouldn't be in this book. But we'll get to that a little later. The next thing I want to talk about is some of the systems and the tracking sheets for some things. When it comes to the section about how many magic items you need, for example, they're talking about up to 100, I think, over a 20-level campaign. I was like, okay, that makes sense. You've built in like the mechanics of needing magic items, it sounds like. That makes sense, whatever. And then you obviously have to remember, of those 100, some of them are consumables. It's not like 100 weapons or armor or whatever. Some of it is like healing potions maybe, or potion of giant strength or whatever. So I thought that was fine. But then there's a blurb on that page that talks about not needing any magic items. And, you know, it's in the bottom left corner talking about you don't necessarily need magic items to run a balanced campaign. In fact, the game doesn't necessarily... It works just fine balance-wise without any. And the problem I have with this is if you are the DM and you've read this section and you go, oh, cool, I didn't want to run a high magic campaign. I want to run a very low magic campaign. You know, so they do certain things. Maybe they don't ever give permanent magic items and they only do some perishables and only do a couple, right? Things to help you in like dire situations, you know. And so when you get to the table and you've been running this campaign, but you've got one person at your table who maybe has the DMG, maybe they've never DM'd, or maybe they have, and they go, you do know that D&D 5e needs you to give out so many magic items by certain levels. It does say on page blah, 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 blah about all this. And then you go, yeah, but it also says in the blurb that you don't need any because it can be fun. And now it becomes this back and forth. I feel like they contradict each other, right? They're fine because they're both right, probably, right? You don't need magic items for your campaign. Best practice probably is to use magic items. A lot of players like magic items. Magic items are very desirable. A lot of people think it spices things up as maybe certain sessions slow down a little. It can change up things your characters can do without having to level up. And, you know, it can be the source of why they go on an adventure. A lot of things, a lot of good things can come from magic items. You know, but at the same time, some groups or some DMs don't want to give out a lot of magic items. So I don't know that the tracking sheet was necessary. I don't think that a rule of approximately this many by this level and this many of this type by this level was necessary for this book. It's probably a sheet I will use, but not all the tracking sheets in here I will use for various reasons. One, I've made my own sheets for different things like settlements and stuff like that. I'll compare to see if I like certain parts about theirs better than mine. But, you know, when it comes down to it, there's also things in here I'm just probably not going to use. Because, again, I have better ones out there. I like their Session 0 planning sheet. I think they could have went a little further. In fact, I like the checklist ones where it says, like, spiders, yes or no, and or just mark it if it's a hard line or a soft line. I like those more because in the moment in a Session 0 as a player, you're not necessarily thinking of the things that might freak you out, especially if someone's just saying, hey, is there anything that's going to bother you in the game? You might go, no, I'm fine with whatever in D&D. You know, so you might not want an open section. It's not guided enough. You might want something that makes you think, oh yeah, SA is not cool in my games. Oh yeah, I actually am an arachnophobe. So like maybe we do a soft line there because I don't want like in-depth detail about spiders or bugs or whatever. You know, so I like other sheets a little more than that one. A lot of the sheets in here are a little bit vague or generic, in my opinion. There are some good ones. There's ones like the travel ones. There's NPC sheets. There's settlement sheets. There's a variety of sheets in here. So again, you just kind of need to go through and figure out which ones you like and which ones you don't. You can get them on D&D Beyond. It's a PDF that you can just go and download right now for free. I highly recommend that. So at least see which ones you like and don't like, and maybe you like certain aspects of them and you just need to make your own. You can go into a Word or text doc, type your own up, and make it exactly what you need. Heck, that's what I do a lot of times, and a lot of people I know do that. Speaking of session 0, though, one thing I want to say that I had learned from a friend who also is a content creator. He streams a ton of games. Michael from Unmade Gaming once recommended to me, and I know he probably didn't come up with this, but he's the one who told me. Do your session 0, but encourage people to use a Google Doc for anonymity. And if there's any hard lines or soft lines, they can go there and put things in. And that way you don't have to discuss at the table SA being wrong in this game or their phobias. You don't have to go in depth with any of that because now they can do that in that document. And the other aspect of that is you review it as a DM before you prep every session. And they then can also go in and add stuff throughout the campaign because you're going to be reviewing it before every session. At the start of every session, you go over it with your whole group. And you say, all right, guys, let's go over the hard and soft lines before you start play, just so everyone is on the same page of what is okay and what's not. Or what degree of detail they should give on certain things. Because if it's a soft line, you probably gloss over it more. And that will prevent some problems in your games. Some of you already know your groups. You won't need this. Some of you have been playing with your groups for years. But if you're new and your group is new, doing this until things get going, until you guys get comfortable with each other, it's a great way to avoid any potential issues. There's a lot of things that I think are really good about the systems in this book, things they've added that weren't in 2014. And there's things that they omitted that were in 2014 that I don't like. Some of the stuff I really like is the magic items having these special features now. So there are the set magic items like there's always been, and it will tell you to roll on a table for different like minor positive things, major positive things, minor negative things, and major negative things. And it adds so much flavor to these magic items that can make it different from one campaign to another. So you can give the same item to your party in one campaign and the same item to another, but because you've rolled on these tables, it's a little bit different. Maybe it gives a couple extra abilities or makes one character bloodthirsty or another character more passive or whatever, without pulling it up and going through the table. But there's a lot of really cool things on there that I will highly recommend, again, that make that a very cool section right there. Some of the things in here, though, I don't think I'm going to use much. For example, creating backgrounds. I think backgrounds took a huge step back in the 2024 edition of D&D. I think they were moving in the right direction in 2014 with having more roleplay flavor to each background. And I just feel like they stripped all life out of it in this one by removing certain things. Like some of the features associated with some of them were really cool. Whether that was having retainers. That was a really fun one. Had a lot of groups that used that in fun ways, and it gave you some NPCs to use as a DM. And obviously they weren't supposed to be used in combat, but they could be, cannon fodder later on, and maybe their person could pick up more people in town. Anyways, I liked a lot of the stuff about those features in the 2014 handbook. And they got rid of those. They tied attributes to backgrounds, which now makes certain backgrounds suboptimal for certain classes. So you're going to see players purposely not choosing those backgrounds. They should have just kept with the idea of what Tasha's had, which solves all the problems of, racial ability modifiers, and gives the control back to the players to decide, what attributes do you want to be your best ones. You could do the 3 points in 3 different, 1 in 3 different attributes, 2 in one in another, or, I would even say letting them put 3 in one. And I know that sounds powerful because you can get up to a good number. You just tell them no more than 20. You can put up to 3 in 1 point. You have 3 bonus points to spend, however you want. Just keep it simple. That would have been fine. The creating creatures or monsters section is very simplistic in my opinion. It basically just tells you to reskin a monster, which is great. It's a great tip. I do it all the time. I reskin monsters. I reskin everything over and over again, and it makes things easy. It also gives you a good understanding of how things work. But the thing in here is it's like, yeah, if you want to CR whatever monster, take another one, and maybe you add some of these features. If it changes any of the damage or their hit points, well, it makes them more difficult, so you might want to think about that before doing it. But if it gives them a different vision or a this resistance or whatever, it doesn't necessarily do that. So I don't agree with that. One, because situationally, it's going to be more difficult to fight a creature that can see in magical darkness because it's got tremor sense or whatever. It's going to be really hard in a place with magical darkness for you to actually do that. In fact, it's going to be near impossible because you're going to be rolling at disadvantage the whole time, whereas it's going to probably have advantage because it can sense exactly where you are. Like, that is a huge ability that can change things drastically. And this is why the encounter system, I foresee still being an issue in this edition. People are looking for a mathematical approach that's going to give them exactly what they want with the encounter building, and they're not going to get that. They're going to think they are, and then they're going to do certain encounters where some creatures have certain abilities or the player characters have certain spells and abilities, and it's not going to give off the tone or feel they want, and they're going to be confused because the math says this. And I think that there should have been more explanation about encounter building around things to take into account. You really need to understand your player characters in the group. Who's good at what? Who's bad at what? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? And then based on that, you should then, when you're planning your encounter, you can do it with the math, but then understand your monsters. What are they good at? What are they bad at? What are their strengths and weaknesses? If they have strengths that are also these guys' weaknesses, that's going to be a problem, right? Because now that's like taking that up a notch and this here. So you can really mess them up. Now, if the players have the strengths that are also that monster's weaknesses, it kind of balances out. But that doesn't always work that way. So there's more that I think could go into encounter building. Some of the sections that I think did really well are the hazards and traps, poisons, all of those systems and stuff I think are really well done. I don't have enough of an opinion about renown. I usually don't use stuff like that in my games. And there's other things I don't really use. And like the chase scenes. I've never done a chase scene using the mechanics in Dungeons & Dragons. So I don't really know how well that's going to go over. In fact, the chase scenes almost... In my games, if there's a chase scene, it almost seems like it's out of the blue and I didn't expect it a lot of the times. Because I improvise a lot of my encounters and stuff. And maybe I have a monster flee and the party starts chasing it. So then you want to break it into a chase scene. Well, chase scenes tell you to map things out and come up with this and that. And I think that needs to be prepped to use the chase scenes. So I don't know that I'll ever use that. But hey, if you've used chase scenes and you want to tell me what your thoughts on it are, please let me know in the comments below. I would love to hear what you think about it. So I think the systems, there's a lot of good ones in here. Some that I don't think I'll use. I think a lot of it's going to come down to your GMing style as well, whether you're going to use certain ones or not, or how you're going to implement them too. There's a huge section in this book that's dedicated to creating adventures and campaigns, and I really like those sections. I think they are very helpful. There's good examples on adventures in the adventure section. The campaign section talks about weaving these adventures together. A lot of good things that can inspire you to come up with your own stuff, or you could just pluck it and, elaborate on it for your own stuff. And I think those are really good too, especially for new DMs to have ideas on how to do these things. The section of campaigns goes into Greyhawk and gives you quite a few pages about the setting. And I, as someone who is starting to lean more towards more homebrew, I've run quite a few pre-written campaigns on this channel, but I've found that I enjoy running my homebrew stuff far more. As someone who's doing that, this section is invaluable. You can look over the Greyhawk section and figure out what you need, what types of things you should probably tell your players about here and there, and just all the things you should kind of prepare for in your own setting to make it interesting. So again, I think this can be very helpful for people. On top of that, it might just inspire you to run a campaign in Greyhawk. They break down how to incorporate things like the pre-written modules before in combination with the blurbs in the pre-written modules about the Greyhawk setting and the other settings. It has a little bit about dealing with Temple of Elemental Evil or a dragon cult and stuff like that. And so, again, you can then use those within Greyhawk rather than in Forgotten Realms or Faerun. So, great section there. Another section that I thought was really well done, and if you don't know a lot about the multiverse and the planes centered around D&D, then I think this does a good job of giving you an overview of it. It goes pretty in depth for what it is. I don't know that you're going to run a full campaign based on the information in here, but you can learn enough and get enough there that if you're comfortable just making up the rest around it, you can have a lot of fun having your parties travel to the different planes of existence. There's other products over the years that have come out that can elaborate more on these planes, though. There's plenty of resources. So, again, great section there. Love the art in the planes, the multiversal section, or the cosmos as they call it. But yeah, great section there as well. To at least give you an overview of how things are on the different planes. The next section was magic items. Now, again, I already talked about the special features. However, there's other things about this section that I thought were interesting. I am somebody who is a fan of nostalgia. I like the D&D cartoon, and I actually think it's really cool that their items are in here. Now, I know there's people who think it's silly and don't want that, but I think it's cool. So I'm glad they put it in there. There's a lot of things in there here that are pretty much the same thing as 2014. You're going to get a lot of use out of that as a DM, so I'm fine with how that section is. The next section that comes up is Bastions. Well, Bastions, it's kind of interesting because I've watched some other D&D DMG 2024 reviews, and the early videos that came out raved about Bastions and how they wanted to use them and create them and all this stuff. And so I had high hopes just based on that. And then I picked this book up a couple weeks ago, and here we are now in the holiday season. And I'm probably like 2 months behind everyone who did those reviews, or at least that read the book then. And I don't know how in depth these people went into the Bastions, but I don't like them for a few reasons. One, it feels very restrictive in what you can and can't do. It's restricted by level. There's these huge financial numbers that you need to hit for like basic things, but then like the cool stuff that you would think you could do, you can't necessarily do, and it's too strict in my opinion. It just feels like a thing that was tacked on to this system to take away some money or give the players something to spend money on. I've always thought it was cool if my party wanted to start a business or headquarters. I think the Acquisitions Incorporated book elaborated quite a bit on, building your home base, headquarters, and things like that. Again, great ideas. I don't remember how that one went about it now because it's been a few years since I've even looked at that book. But I am fine with a party that wants to open a tavern or wants to sell potions and start a business and things like that. I'm totally fine with that. The things about this just don't work for me. Like, your party has to be present in order to change what the Bastion is doing. You can't just send a pigeon or use magical communication or send a hireling back to relay a message. You can't do any of that. You have to be there and boom. So I don't like that. And the financial part, again, is really expensive. So it's just not my ideal way to handle this. I think it's a nice idea. I just don't like the execution of it personally. I also think it doesn't provide enough benefits. The amount of work that you might put into it and stuff like that, and with how rigid it is, there's just not enough benefits, in my opinion. So, again, I think it could use some more work. But yeah, and if you like it, that's great. Let me know if you disagree with me and why. I'd love to hear it. In summary, I believe this is a fantastic book for new DMs. I think it's a great book for anyone who's going to be running D&D 2024. Obviously there are some things that it's not perfect. It's not for everybody, but I do believe it's going to be very good for new DMs. Many longtime DMs might benefit from some of this advice, especially if they haven't played in a variety of groups with a variety of playstyles. Some of the tips and ideas in here they might not have ever thought about or ever seen elsewhere. And so maybe it'll inspire them to try different things like how to handle death or whatever. So again, love that for them. I hope that people out there can find those little things that'll make their games better. I am somebody who's always striving to make my game better, so reading this is always beneficial to me. It just gives me new things to think about and ideas, even if most of it I've seen or heard before. The other thing about this book, though, is while, yes, there's great information in here, I think it was the right way to do a DMG compared to 2014, which I think wasn't as good of a DMG. But in the 2014 book, there were things that were in there that aren't in here that I think are big misses. The injuries tables, short-term and permanent, for example. I've used those countless times in my games. I absolutely love it, and will continue to. So that is something that I would recommend. You don't have to necessarily buy the 2014 DMG. Go out, find those tables, and make a copy of them and put them with your current DMG. The Madness tables, I think, were pretty solid in there. We've had some fun with those. And we used to use it for things like if you drop to 0 hit points and were resurrected, or drop to 0 hit points and were and made your death saves and still survived. But because of that closeness with death, something happened. Or because you were dropped to 0, you get a permanent injury, or you roll to see if you get a permanent or a short-term injury. We used to do all sorts of stuff. And it always led to so much more fun in our games. Something else that wasn't in this book at all, it seemed, and maybe I just overlooked it, but there was no flanking. I know a lot of groups use flanking and have a variety of different house rules for it, whether it's a +1 bonus, a +1 bonus for each creature flanking, or advantage, or whatever. So I thought that was a miss too. I think they could have done some discussion on flanking a little bit. I think they dropped the ball with creating monsters, and personally, I think balancing encounters in here, while they simplified it, I don't think it fixes the problems that a lot of DMs used to express frustration about to me. I think they're still going to have problems, but I'm going to give it a shot. As soon as the new monster manual comes out, I'm going to try and use it, and I'm going to run some sample encounters for myself and see if it holds up and does the tone and feel I want. I just don't think that's going to ultimately work out. We're just going to have to wait and see what the monster manual actually says and how the new monster manual portrays monsters. Again, there's things in here that might be good that I probably will never use, and I've never used anything like it. There's some things that make it a little disappointing. Ultimately, I think this is a great DM's guide. Should you buy this book? I would definitely recommend it, new DM. If I was just beginning DMing right now, I think this book would accelerate the learning process for me by almost 10 years. There are things in here that are that good. Some of the narrative things are that good. And I had to learn it through trial and error, a lot of error, a lot of groups and players that might think I'm a terrible DM to this day who I DM'd for 20 years ago. And if only I had this book, I would have been worlds better, and who knows how good I'd be now. Again, just the how to prep alone is a great section. For more experienced DMs, I would say that if you have your own systems in place for how you like to do things, you already feel like you're a good DM, your groups think you're exceptional, you have gotten nothing but praise for your DMing, maybe this book isn't for you. Especially if you're not running D&D 2024 very much, it might not be a book that you feel the need for. So it's going to depend, but that's my opinion on that. I do want to say, with this being the holiday season, I think this is a fantastic gift idea for the young D&D players in your group. Maybe you have a high school friend or child that really likes Dungeons and Dragons or tabletop RPGs and has talked about DMing before, or they just like tabletop RPGs. Maybe they've only played. This wouldn't be a bad book to buy them. Buy it for them. Maybe they'll read it, get some ideas, and think it's might not seem that hard to them now that they've got these ideas and tips, and they will give it a shot. This book is going to help a lot of new DMs out. I think we're going to see DMing as a whole get so much better over these next few years thanks to having a book like this. So I saw some comparisons by other people, content creators out there, comparing it to the 4E Dungeon Master guide in some ways, and that is, from my understanding, a good thing. I never played 4E. I don't own any 4E books, but if it's as good as some people say, then it can't be that bad, right? So with that, I hope you enjoyed my review of the Dungeons & Dragons 2024 Dungeon Master Guide, and I hope you will think about subscribing and liking this video. Very soon on this channel, we are going to be doing a video that I've been thinking about for a little bit that is also for you Dungeon Masters out there. I am going to be using magic cards for something D&D or tabletop RPG related. So if you want to see what that one's going to be about, hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and I want to know what you think I'm going to be using Magic the Gathering cards for in my tabletop RPGs moving forward in the comments below. So let me know what you think. Get your guesses in. Who knows? Maybe there'll be a prize if you guess correctly. With that, thank you for watching again, and I will see you guys next time. This was Master of the Game. I am Juice. Game on.